Hey everybody, and welcome back to another edition of This Week in Cleantech, your favorite 15-minute-ish roundup of the biggest stories in climate and clean energy, assembled by yours truly and Mike Casey every single week. You know, Chicago, famous for the song, does anybody really know what time it is? The answer is we sure as hell don't, because on last week's show, we said it was still 2025. A shout out to my beautiful wife for catching that and then letting me continue to tape the whole rest of the show. Today is Friday, January 23rd, 2026. We have turned over to the new year. We are not going backwards. Forward is the only way, as we like to say on this show. We got a special returning guest in the waiting, Maxine Joselow from the New York Times, returning to the program. You'll hear her dulcet tones in a moment. In the interim, you're stuck with me, Factor This content director Paul Gerke, alongside Cleantech commentator Mike Casey of Tigercomm. Mike, how the heck are you?
I'm heck fine, friend. You have returned to the work world. Welcome back. I know it's always not an easy re-entry after paternity leave. Hey, I want to give a listener shout out to Keely McNeem. She's the media and content manager at RenewComm. Just met her yesterday in person. She's a fan of the show. And I need to clarify my shout out last week to our friend and fellow podcaster, Aaron Nichols. He recently got married, not engaged. I misspoke on the show, so just want to...
Married is like the next thing. Like, that's engaged,
yeah.
But like more serious. Like, you really, really can't mess it up. There's like vows and stuff that are taken. I don't know.
Yes,
it's
sir.
The whole thing. I got a ring too. Shout out to Keely. Keely's actually great. I've worked with Keely a few times, and it's always good to know that the person on the other end of that email is like a real human being and not just an AI agent, especially in today's day and age. I mean, we jest, but in all honesty, face-to-face interpersonal communication more important than ever, and that goes two ways, folks. We love to hear what you think and incorporate your thoughts on the show, whether that's suggesting stories or telling us to get bent. Just email us. We got a fancy new email address for you to fill. TWIC, TWIC, at Tigercomm with 2Ms.us. Send whatever you want, and someone is going to read it, and maybe it'll make it on the show. We do have a bunch of stuff on the show, including the biggest stories in energy this week. Mike, let's get it started. Story numero uno.
Our first story was recommended by a listener, and it's from the Carolina Journal. Supreme Court will not hear Duke Energy's appeal in an anti-monopoly case. Paul?
This is a pretty big deal. This case stems from a dispute over who would supply electricity to Fayetteville, North Carolina, after the city's long-term power contract came up for renewal. Duke Energy, as you may know, has long dominated the Carolinas' wholesale electricity markets, including service to that very town in North Carolina. When Fayetteville's long-term contract came up for renewal, a rival company, NTE Carolinas, tried to enter the market with a cleaner and cheaper natural gas plant. Now, according to NTE, Duke couldn't match the offer through ordinary competition, so it allegedly coordinated anti-competitive tactics, including a, quote, sham breach of an interconnection agreement to make it look like NTE's plan wouldn't be able to transmit power. NTE argues Duke's actions were intended to deter the city from switching suppliers, then sued the utility for anti-competitive behaviors. Duke, on the other hand, argues its actions were lawful and just business stuff, because but then after the Fourth Circuit Court revived the case, Duke petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court to review that ruling. If you understood what I was saying, congrats. I didn't through that mush mouth. The court did decline to hear the appeal. Mike, you have any thoughts on this?
I do. This isn't the end of the case, but it is a big deal. By passing on it, the Supreme Court is basically letting the lower court's ruling stand, meaning a jury can decide whether this all adds up to illegal monopolization. So if a cleaner, cheaper proposed power plant gets pushed out by anti-competitive tactics, customers are the ones who end up paying for it.
Yep.
Paul, story number 2.
Second story, Mike, by a former guest, Jennifer Hiller at the Wall Street Journal. This one's titled, Soaring Electricity Costs Are Now a Hot Political Issue. You don't say so, Mike.
Yeah, I'm telling you, we're going to be talking about this all year long. Mm-hmm. U.S. electricity costs, they're outpacing inflation, pushing utility bills into the political spotlight because people are feeling it on a monthly basis. So ahead of the midterms, after rising 6.7% just in December and 38% since 2020. It's a lot. Mm-hmm. Much of the blame is falling on energy-hungry data centers. It prompts bipartisan concern from governors and lawmakers who argue that households should not have to shoulder the cost of expanding power infrastructure just to accommodate big tech's data centers. So Trump administration officials have pressed the nation's largest grid operator to hold an emergency power auction, and they're pushing tech companies to supply their own power or pay for new generation for new data centers. At the state level, elected officials from both parties are challenging proposed utility rate hikes, citing affordability concerns among consumers. Paul.
All of that is lip service to most of the people listening to this podcast, Mike. What really matters is the bill that they get in their inbox, whether that's their mailbox or their digital mailbox. And the bottom line is that electricity is going to cost more pretty much everywhere. At least 36 states. We know that it's going to go up, and this is amidst governors' races this year. Arizona, Louisiana, Georgia, with really contentious contests there. Costs and data centers are front and center in those races. And in Georgia, 2 incumbent commissioners lost in November. Ed Hers, an energy economist at the University of Houston, says, quote, "The general rule is if the price goes up at the pump for gasoline or at the meter for electricity, then the incumbent doesn't get reelected. That would be any incumbent, Democrat or Republican," end quote. I imagine things are a bit more complicated in most races, Mike, than that, but I think it frames the discussion in an important way, and that's that there's only a limited bandwidth for most of us when it comes to the cost of our electricity. And in many places, regardless of what the Supreme Court thinks about that monopoly case in our last story, we don't have a choice. We're stuck with the service provider that we've got. And we'll see just how angry people get about having to pay more for this technology that they're either not using or don't want to pay for the infrastructure for, and see where the breaking point lies, Mike.
So we typically cover national stories, but this third one is an analysis by Dan Wang of Stanford University's Hoover Institution. It's a right-leaning think tank there. He had a piece run in the New York Times that I talked about on LinkedIn, and I just thought we had to cover it here on the show. So I'm just going to admit I'm the one who pushed this. So he writes this thing, Trump is obsessed with oil, but Chinese batteries will soon run the world.
Yeah, this is nothing new to many of you, I'm sure, who have heard a ton about batteries and how essential they're becoming to our grid from coast to coast here in the U.S. But so there's this global push for electrification and reducing fossil fuel use. And Mr. Wang writes that President Trump still has this hunger for natural resources from abroad and the power that this foreign oil might provide him. His gamble, though, is that countries are still going to want to buy U.S. oils for cars, trucks, ships, and planes. China, on the other hand, plans on substituting electricity for oil to solve its problems, selling batteries and electric products abroad. Canada, the newest buyer of Chinese EVs, after cutting its 100% tariff on Chinese electric cars in return for lower tariffs on Canadian farm products. Last year, 54% of new cars sold in China were either battery-operated or plug-in hybrids, more than half. This is part of the reason why oil consumption is on track to peak next year in 2027, and then theoretically downhill from there. Chinese EV makers are setting records too. Just a couple episodes ago, we talked about BYD overtaking Tesla in global sales. They're making strides, and if you haven't seen the products they're offering, do yourself a favor and look up a video showing off some of the bells and whistles of this stuff. It puts the U.S. offerings to shame, Mike.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about this in historical terms. I hope I'm not going to be too much of an egghead here, but, about a year ago, I read this book on the Byzantine Empire, and it lasted from basically the 400s until the 1400s. It's essentially this extension of the Roman Empire, and it was based in Constantinople, which is now Istanbul. So at one time, it was mighty, but over the centuries, it fell apart, and it was eventually reduced to just an area around Constantinople, which was the Ottomans conquered it in 1453.
As everyone knows, right.
As a non-expert, you look back at the long line of foolish things the Byzantines did, and perhaps the fatal one, the dumbest one, was about 80 years before the Constantinople fell. It sold its remaining navy to Venice to pay off a debt. They just outsourced their future to other maritime powers.
Yeah, that's like putting the house keys on the table at the weekly poker game. You just don't do that.
Yeah, it was a deeply stupid thing to do. So I fear that decades from now, we're going to look back at this period of time, the last 12 months, perhaps the next 12 months, and realize that this is when we did the equivalent. We basically gave away our global leadership in the energy sources, which, by the way, we came up with, that will soon dominate the global economy. It seems very clear that the fracking lobby is very skillfully working the Trump administration on the inside to preserve quarterly profits. This is a deeply stupid thing to do. Paul, our fourth story.
Story 4, Clara Hudson, Wall Street Journal. Solar projects face turmoil under Trump, but big business is still banking on them. Mike, tell us what's in it.
Yeah. So this story provides a counter view on what I just talked about, and I want to acknowledge it, and it backs a view of those most bullish on how clean energy is going to fare. I want to acknowledge three bulls that I deeply respect. So Next Power's Dan Sugar, he's quoted in this piece. REC's Kerry Hayes, and Jigar Shah, who just left the Energy Department on the Loan Guarantee Program. So yes, the current trends that I have been talking about in a piece before have led to the shutdown of Pure Light Power and the bankruptcy of Pine Gate Renewables. It's prompted the International Energy Agency to downgrade its U.S. renewable capacity growth forecast. But large corporate buyers are still attracted to solar's low cost and speed to deployment. Deutsche Bank recently backed Aspen Power with a $200 million capital raise. And major brands and tech companies, including Tapestry, Meta, Google, and Apple, are signing solar deals to meet carbon pollution targets to keep pace with rising electricity demand from data centers. So I just think there's a counter view out there, and it's worth noting. Paul?
Yeah, we'll see how much anyone really cares about those renewable targets. They've definitely taken a backseat to time to power lately, and you've seen a lot of the big players kind of back off, whether in public or just sort of quietly, putting those aspirations on the shelves as other things come up to sort of want to feed these data centers. But listen, even without the federal incentives, Mike, we've seen signs of growth in the last year. Next Tracker rather, which is now Next Power. It's going to take me forever to get that right. Next Power has added that new hub in Nashville under CEO Dan Sugar, friend of ours. We love Dan. We love what Next Power is doing and all that they've added to that company over the last couple of years. And we know that solar has its advantages, that it's going to keep it competitive with other forms of energy. For example, you don't have to dig it out of the ground. That helps a lot. A hybrid solar and battery project can be put together in maybe 18 months still. Natural gas, depending on if you're on a wait list for a turbine, you're looking at 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years. It just depends on where you are, too. And solar growth is really visible in sun-rich states. You see what's happening in Texas. We don't even have to talk about California. Solar plus storage is quite simply the lowest cost and fastest to market option. It remains that way. And as long as it remains that way, despite the incentives, we're going to continue to see growth, even if it's not front and center like we're used to over the last 4 years or so. Developers emphasizing that there are long-lived assets that are being put into the ground here. They're designed to survive political cycles. Even when the support's not there, the power still needs to stay on, and that's what these machines can do. Mike, story number 5. Let's get our guest in the building.
We have a returning guest, Maxine Joselow, now from the New York Times. She was at the Washington Post when she last joined us. She has a piece which I thought was just so important. What's a human life worth? The EPA says $0. All right, Maxine. We were talking about stupid earlier this show, and perhaps you have more to say on this topic. So, if people haven't read this, I think, quite important story, what's the bottom line takeaway?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back on the show. Good to be back. And I think the takeaway is that this is a really wonky but really important story. And just to explain it for people who aren't steeped in EPA regulations and cost-benefit analysis, basically EPA for the past 3 or 4 decades has assigned a dollar value to the lives saved and asthma attacks avoided by cleaner air and by strengthening limits on air pollution. And they're no longer going to do that. And that's a really big change from past practice under both Democratic and Republican administrations.
Maxine, I want to pay you the ultimate compliment first and foremost, and that's that I shared this story organically on social media without knowing it was you or without knowing we were going to have you on the show, because the relevance of it to what we talk about on a weekly basis on this program is dead on. no pun intended with the dead on turn of phrase, but this is an alarming thing. Like this is going to cost human lives ultimately, no matter how the arithmetic shakes out or how you want to compute it. This is going to hurt people. What is the driving force behind this? Like, is there, and maybe I don't even need to ask this question, but is there, right? I mean, like, is there not human ethics somewhere where there's like this ambiguous boundary that we eventually run into, or no, we just don't care?
The driving force seems to be the administrator of the EPA's Office of Air and Radiation. His name is Aaron Szabo. He previously worked as a lobbyist. I think Mike was saying lobbying might have been a factor, and he did previously work as a lobbyist for the oil and chemical industries. One of his clients was the American fuel and petrochemical manufacturers, and they have lobbied for looser air pollution limits in the past. The EPA spokeswoman, when I asked for comment on that connection, said that he takes his commitment to cleaner air really seriously. And interestingly, he has cystic fibrosis, which is a lung disease that's exacerbated by dirty air, and said that he takes it extra seriously because of that in his Senate confirmation hearing.
I can tell he does. Maxine, I know it's fanciful thinking. It's probably not, wouldn't have been an appropriate repertorial practice. But did you ask him if Lee Zeldin thinks his life is worth zero?
I did not ask them that question, Mike. I did ask them repeatedly for a follow-up article that I wrote that was published the other day, whether they are officially abandoning a tool that economists use to value a human life in dollars. It's called the value of a statistical life, or VSL. And they did not directly answer that question.
It's amazing.
All paints.
Paul, ask questions. I just don't know what to say.
I know this all paints just a really bleak picture. Is there a grain of sunshine that we can pull out of this, Maxine? Is there anything that our listeners can take away, through your reporting that doesn't leave them with this sort of moribund, heavy feeling that their life is meaningless, and even something as simple as clean air is negotiable when it comes to padding somebody's wallet?
I think you're asking the wrong reporter on the I'm on the doom and gloom beat. I think, one interesting thing that I mentioned in my article the other day, the follow-up article on the value of a statistical life, is that in the past, changes like this have prompted a huge outcry and pushback. And during the George W. Bush administration, EPA tried something similar but less dramatic, where they proposed valuing older people's lives less, because if air pollution limits were strengthened, that would protect fewer years of life that they had left. And there was a huge backlash. The proposal was to use a 37% lower value of a statistical life for people over 70 years old. And AARP ran ads with an older woman having a 37% off sign dangling from her glasses.
Wow. And
EPA reversed course because of the huge public backlash. So I would say if you're opposed to this change, tell the agency. You can comment in the public comments on the rulemaking docket. You can write letters. You can call your members of Congress. And I'm, an unbiased journalist. I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, but there are things that people who are opposed to it can do to make that known.
Clear. Well, I will just say that this is a product of very skillful lobbying. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a barnacle on the Hall of the Republic. These are people who spend their time doing nothing except getting changes made by laundering lobbyist talking points. And it has direct bearing on our energy mix that we talk about here. So with that said, Paul Gerke, we need to go to our Cleantecher of the Week.
Mike Casey pulling no punches on the podcast or in jiu-jitsu. You better watch yourself around this guy. He tells it like it is. All right, Cleantecher of the Week, everybody. It is funeral director Eric Chamberlain. He helped bring wind power to Rockport, Missouri, making it one of the first U.S. towns to generate more wind electricity than it used. Nearly 2 decades later, the wind project is still delivering lasting local benefits through jobs, landowner payments, and major county tax revenue. Congrats, Eric Chamberlain, this week's Cleantecher of the Week.
We need to thank, grudgingly, our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, whose ego continues to grow, Paul. Backstage, he's becoming just He is taking over the show. I just got to say, that's his aspiration. He wants to get rid of both of us and become the show.
You're so mean to him. I'm going to start playing good cop, bad cop with Brian Mendez and just say the guy works really hard and thankless hours, and he does his best to make you and I look good, which is a hell of a task.
It's a
shout
big
out
task.
to Brian Mendez and
All right,
everybody
fine.
else.
You're such an apple polisher.
Yeah,
Alex
another
Peterson.
thanks to Maxine Joselow for listening to all this too, and joining us this week and being unbiased even when we are not on This Week in Clean Tech. Please subscribe, give some feedback, share story suggestions. If you liked what you heard, let us know about it. If you don't, we'll delete that email too. You can read all the articles we discussed this week by clicking on the links in the episode description. You'll also find them in the post on factorthis.com. Be good, people.